Valve is trying to destroy the console ecosystem. How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is Deck Ready, my channel all about Steam hardware. I hope you're having a great week playing a ton of video games, and this is the third episode in my new series, Debunking Steam Hardware Myths. We started with the Steam Deck, we continued on with the Steam Machine, and this time around we're talking about everything. Before I jump into the first myth, I'm trying to hit 100,000 subscribers before the end of the year, so if you want to help me reach that goal, subscribe, set your notifications to all, and most importantly, have a great rest of your week. So the first myth I want to tackle in today's video is that Valve will jump ship on this Steam Machine just like they did with the original one. And at first I was like, maybe that's a fair thought if people don't know what's going on with Valve lately. But the more I think about it, the more I think it's being the least charitable you possibly can. The situation with the Steam Machine this time around is completely different. Last time Valve was jumping in head first and they didn't really have that great of a plan. As far as the hardware goes, all they made was the Steam Link and the Steam controller. And the Steam controller had a rough uphill battle from the very start because it just looks really weird. Like, I like it, I use it, I think it's a great controller, but like it's not photogenic, if you know what I'm saying, right? Like, you have to explain it to people, and if you have to explain a tech product, it's generally not going to be this mass market appeal type device. And when it comes to the Steam machines themselves, I mean, you got to remember that Valve didn't actually make any of the hardware. The first one and the only one that made it to market was the Alienware one, and that did not really end up being that great of a device. Like, they didn't ship it with SteamOS, they shipped it with Windows, and it was actually very difficult to get an actual Steam machine at any point of time before they eventually canceled them. So this time they're building the hardware themselves, of course, which is a huge step in the right direction, and we'll talk about the Steam controller later in the video, but that is a big improvement as well. And as far as SteamOS goes, they have, of course, all the development time that they put into it before they even announced the Steam Deck, but the Steam Deck's been out for over 3 years now, and in that time, they have not only improved SteamOS with great ideas that they come up with, they've also implemented tons and tons of ideas that come directly from us, the fans. Like, at the beginning of the Steam Deck's life cycle, it was very obvious they were watching people's YouTube videos and looking at what people wanted, because we'd post videos like Fan the Deck and I, and then within a week, features would be added to the Steam Deck and SteamOS itself. So I think that goes a really long way, and as someone who's installed it in its current state on a PC, it really is the real deal in terms of being a desktop usable operating system, which is even crazier when you consider that at the time I installed it, it wasn't made for desktops. It was made for the Legion Go S and the Steam Deck, and maybe the Legion Go regular edition or the ROG Ally and Xbox ROG Ally if you wanted to go through the effort to install it. But even when you scale it up to a TV, everything just worked. The biggest issue I had was having to type in Steam Deck equals 0 command when I was playing Indiana Jones and maybe a couple other games, but outside of that, I set the global resolution as 1440p in SteamOS, and every game launches in 1440p, and I get max power out of my 9070 XT, and I have not had any issue at all playing any game that I've thrown at this thing. Like, it works incredibly well. And we'll talk about this more later in the video, but Valve isn't trying to sell 100 million of these things. Like, if they did, I'm sure they'd be extremely happy, but I think everyone, whether it's someone like me who has a YouTube channel about Steam hardware or Valve themselves, is fully aware of the fact that this is a little bit more broad than the niche device that the Steam Deck is, but not by much, right? Like, I feel like if they get close to 10 million units with the first version of this thing and then it grows from there, they'll be extremely happy. And if they get to like 15 or 20 million units, they'll be blown out of the water. Like, I have no idea what their internal metrics say, and I don't want to like shoot them in the foot a little bit by saying that it's going to only sell 10 million units, but for a new piece of hardware that's coming out in 2025, when the hardware conditions are this difficult and everyone's so entrenched in their preferred operating system, whether it's PlayStation, Nintendo, Xbox, or even Windows to some extent, I think it's pretty cool to see Valve being able to launch something new and genuinely interesting and have people kind of be willing to jump in and play it day one. And all of that is thanks to how much work they put into SteamOS and the Steam Deck for the last 3 years. Like, they've proven that they're walking the walk, right? Like, they didn't walk away from that thing because it only sold 5 million. So to say that they'd walk away from this Steam machine like they did with the original, I just don't even see it as a possibility unless they sell like 1,000 of these things. But Valve does seem like the kind of company that would support just 1,000 users who bought their hardware, at least for a few years until it becomes profitably unobtainable to continue doing it. The next myth I want to debunk is that the Steam controller is going to be dead on arrival. And I get it. When you look at the Steam Deck without ever holding one, it doesn't necessarily look like the most ergonomic device in the world. mainly because, at least on the LCD, the bezels are kind of thick and it makes it look a lot bigger than it actually is. But once you hold it in your hands, you immediately realize that this is one of the best, if not the best designed handhelds ever, ergonomically speaking and just across the board speaking. The controller grips are excellent, the triggers are in the right place, the bumpers are easy to reach, and if you've ever held either a Legion Go S or an ROG Ally, you know that you can screw up bumper placement, so I'm glad Valve didn't. And one thing that always impressed me about the Steam Deck is how light it is. I don't know what the raw numbers are, but it feels lighter than the ROG Ally, it feels lighter than the Xbox ROG Ally, it feels lighter than the Legion Go S, and even if it's not, it's a very well balanced device. And the cool thing is, all of that is going to get better with the Steam controller because you're taking out a lot of the components like the screen, the bigger battery, you're shrinking the size of the motherboard, you're taking out the SoC, like you're stripping out a lot of parts, which is going to result in a controller that might honestly need a little bit of a weight to feel like a normal weighted controller because it might be too light. Going back to the trackpads, I know people are kind of split on how necessary they are. If you use it as just a gaming device, you probably feel like it's not all that necessary, but if you ever dig into the desktop mode, it is great because on my Bazzite PC, my SteamOS PC, it switches back and forth. I don't like using the Logitech keyboard and mouse combo sort of keyboard that they've come out with because it's not accurate and it kind of breaks the whole magic of having a TV PC that can be controlled with the controller. If I could get trackpads for my DualSense or my 8BitDo Ultimate Controller 2, I totally would. But once the Steam controller is available, I'm buying two. So I have one for my Steam machine and one that's floating for my PC down here. And of course my Bazzite / SteamOS PC, wherever that ends up, because I just can't imagine it being either even on par or any worse than the Steam Deck. And the Steam Deck's comfortability and just overall controller layout is already as close to perfect as it gets, at least in my opinion. It's also a bizarre hill to die on. Like there are plenty of things you could criticize about any piece of hardware out there, but the controller is just such a weird thing to kind of crap on because I remember people did it with the DualSense and that ended up being like a great evolution of the DualShock 4. And speaking of the DualShock 4, people shit all over that when it was announced, and that might be the best controller Sony's ever made. Like a lot of people actually think that. So until you actually hold it in your hands, I know you can't really make an informed opinion, but maybe pump the brakes on the hardcore criticism of how the controller looks because there was a lot of intentional design and thought that went into making it the way it is. And just like with the Steam machine, Valve learned from their mistakes, right? Like the Steam Controller 1 was definitely niche popular, but it didn't gain mass appeal because it was just a little too out there and weird. I feel like it was smart to kind of just split the difference between, you know, like a PC optimized controller and the regular gamepad that everyone is used to. So like, yeah, if this thing looks weird to you, wait until you hold it because I think it's going to impress you. This next myth is definitely interesting because I think it comes from a good place, and it's that Valve is trying to take people away from the console ecosystem and destroy what Microsoft, Nintendo, and Sony have built. And again, I don't think that could be farther from the truth. I get why people want that to be the case because if you've used Windows, for example, over the past year, like when you open up the File Explorer, it flashes white in your face and flashbangs you. Also, my taskbar crashed while I was playing a game and it overheated my laptop to the point where my Wi-Fi chip turned off and I had to restart it twice to fix the issue. The taskbar's icons disappear, but they're still clickable. There's just so many weird little issues on top of a huge one where SSDs were being fried by Windows that came out earlier this year that I was a victim of, that a lot of PC players are kind of at the end of their rope with Windows, and I understand why they want SteamOS to take them down a peg. And if that's the only thing you want, I think you're going to be satisfied because Linux is growing more and more, and the old adage is you only need 3% of people in a movement for it to really take off, and they are well above 3% when it comes to the Steam user base in terms of people on Linux versus people on Windows. So if that's all you want, we're moving in the right direction. But the whole idea of them trying to compete with or take people away from Sony and Nintendo, I mean, if they want to do that, it's going to be really difficult, but I don't think they do because it just doesn't really seem worth it at this point in time. People spent the entire Nintendo Switch and PS4 generation building up a massive library of digital games to the point where 75% of purchases on consoles are digital these days. Like no one's buying physical games anymore and saying, hey, you might not be happy with PlayStation right now, or you might not be happy with Nintendo right now. You can just abandon all of that money you spent on digital games and start over on Steam, that's a massive ask, right? Like, I feel like the middle ground is where they want to sit, where maybe there's people who are curious about the Steam machine or getting into Steam and want a relatively inexpensive way to jump in without having to buy a bunch of parts or build a PC themselves. That's the audience that they're serving. People who have consoles but are curious about PC, people who have Steam Decks and want a good TV system that has more power than the Steam Deck, if we're being honest. But the idea that they're starting a war to end the PlayStation 5 and 6 and the Nintendo Switch 2, I feel like is not the case. And if you want examples of that, just look at how things have gone with the Steam Deck. I don't think Valve has really ever mentioned the word Nintendo, and if they have, it was in response to an interview question, and they've always been really charitable. They're like, we're going for different audiences. If you like the Switch, that's fine. If you want more power and you want to be able to take advantage of your Steam library on the go, we have the perfect device for you. I don't want to pretend I'm perfect either. Like, over the past couple of years, every gaming console manufacturer has done something that really rubbed me the wrong way, whether it's canceling games and laying people off, or releasing broken, unfinished products, or, you know, on the Sony side, Concord, and putting all the money into that instead of the tried and true third-person open world action adventure games. Like, they've all made big mistakes that piss me off, and I've always wanted Steam to kind of show them how it's done. But you can do that without launching a full-scale war against the biggest names in the entire industry. Like, whether they all like it or not, for the foreseeable future, their platforms are going to exist alongside each other. So, you know, they should at least work together to the extent that they're not actively helping their competition beat them. But, you know, they also shouldn't jump in the ring at the first possible chance, because if you're hasty and you try to take opportunities to take other companies down whenever they arise, that's how you end up in the hot water Microsoft is in right now with their entire business, not just Xbox, but across the board. They've really stretched things too thin, and I think people are just getting tired of dealing with their bullshit. And the last myth I want to cover in this video is that the RAM determines the price. And look, I get it. There's a weird situation going on in the world right now where RAM is way too expensive because there's only 3 companies in the entire world that make RAM, which, like, in hindsight seems like a massive oversight, because then you get into a situation where suddenly all the AI data centers need a ton of RAM, and then Micron closes Crucial and exits the entire business altogether, and then you're left with even less people making RAM when they're also selling their RAM to companies like OpenAI and X and everyone else, and then suddenly the prices shoot through the roof. I don't know if people are just trying to get a headline or they're just not really thinking through it, but Valve definitely had an agreement in place to buy a certain amount of RAM for a certain amount of time well before they announced the Steam machine. So hopefully this situation can be resolved by the time they get close to running out of it. But either way, even though at launch they've said they don't want to take a loss on this hardware and they seem pretty firm on the idea, I think they're the kind of company that is not dumb and understands that they're using older parts and that they have a smart audience who understands what these parts are, how old they are, their general power specs and everything like that. So if push came to shove and they had to sell it at a little bit of a loss for a while they wait for RAM to stabilize, I feel fairly confident that they would take it on the chin for at least a little bit before giving in and eventually saying, look guys, we got to raise the prices. And I feel like if they did have to raise the price, they would be pretty open about it. They wouldn't just suddenly do it one day like Sony did or Xbox did. They just seem like the kind of company that understands how their user base would react to being blindsided like that. And honestly, I think we have enough back-end data in terms of being Valve or Steam gamers for long enough to know that, generally speaking, if they have 2 paths in front of them and one is more positive but it hurts them in the long run, and one is more negative but they get a short-term gain out of it, they'll choose the first path every single time, if not 9 times out of 10. And also, I know there's a lot of BOM calculations out there of what these parts cost, but really the only people who know what these parts cost are Valve. Like, even with the GPU, you could look at what the general cost of that specific GPU would be if like Asus was trying to build a laptop, but we do know that with the Steam Deck, they didn't fully custom design that chip. They started with a chip that Microsoft allegedly hired AMD to make for a Surface device and then abandoned the project, and then Valve took that chip and customized it and bought it off the shelf from AMD, and it was a situation where AMD was trying to offload chips, so I'm sure Valve got a great deal. And just judging by the age of the parts and the specific parts they're using, mainly the GPU in the Steam machine, it seems like they kind of did the same thing here, right? Like, they looked at a big stockpile of parts that AMD had and never sold and said, hey, maybe we can do some of the optimization work we did on the Steam Deck back in the day and get a big win out of this, which will help us sell it at a cheaper price, which is is what everyone wants. I know most of you are aware of this, but there's an old adage on YouTube and article writing and everything else that negativity is the easiest way to get clicks, and that is true to a certain extent, but if you do it too much, you definitely burn goodwill with your audience, and then suddenly you'll wake up one day and they'll disappear, which is why a lot of the bigger websites that were huge when I was growing up are kind of falling by the wayside these days, because when you look at Twitter, they'll tweet out the same article 50 times a day, and 9 times out of 10, it's the most negative possible spin on any statement you could possibly come up with. I don't operate that way. I never have. I don't want to make videos about things I hate personally, but yeah, I've just noticed that as time has gone on. So when you see a lot of these negative articles coming out, making it look like the RAM is going to kill the Steam machine and X, Y, and Z, don't necessarily buy into that stuff, because a lot of it, for lack of a better word, is fear mongering. So yeah, I don't want to fully debunk this one, because I think it will be a problem pretty soon after launch, but at least for the launch window of up to 6 months to a year, I think Valve probably has this ironed out, because as with every other myth in this video, this isn't their first rodeo. They have the original Steam machines to fall back on and look to learn from, and they also have all of the data that they've collected from the Steam Deck. They didn't just start from scratch with this, and that's important to keep in mind. So yeah, that brings me to the end of the latest episode of Steam Hardware Myths Debunked. I hope you guys still enjoy these, because they're so much fun to make. I always try to be charitable too. I'm not trying to like go into this with the most, shilly positive mindset ever. I'm trying to be fair to everyone involved, but some of the stuff people are saying feels very, I don't know, like negative on purpose. And that's kind of something that I do like to push against, because at the end of the day, it's just video games, and the devices you play them on kind of matter the least, right? Like the quality of the game is what really matters. And I like that Valve's entire mantra with their hardware so far has been making it easier to play PC games wherever and whenever you want. That's something I can definitely get behind, and I hope you can too. And yeah, if you're still here, subscribe to the channel, set your notifications to all. As always, guys, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.